How do I crank this thing up? Yeah.
Okay, why don't you go over there? Can I crank it down, Brett?
There we go. That's good. That's good.
Okay, no, no. Okay.
Okay, are we all here?
We're here.
Everybody here? Everybody? What?
Not here.
Look anywhere you want. Look out the window. There's some good traffic. It's a beautiful day. So anyway, welcome to the South Sound Story Guild May meeting 2023. And a warning, this is all recorded and it will be on YouTube. So be very careful about what you say.
Now he tells me.
We're going to open up tonight with an opening teller. Billy is going to tell some stories about Mother's Day, and I'm curious to see what it's like because for the first time ever, we're actually going to have some breakout rooms, just like the big guys.
Yeah.
So here's Billy.
Yeah.
Give her a hand.
Thank you. Well, yeah, which way are we going to look?
Looking at you.
Look at us.
Yeah, look at us here.
Okay, okay. I will look at you. And you all look beautiful. And we're going to talk about mothers. We all had one. Some of us still have one. I have a bunch, but most of mine are dead. And that's been kind of the impetus for this particular story time. It's like I had a really hard time when I realized that all my mothers are dead. And yet, they're still here in my head. My dad told me when he was 94 that he was talking to his mother and said, "Ma, I want a new car. I want one of those new Prius cars, one of those new electric cars." And he said, and I heard my mother's voice. He's 94. I heard my mother's voice saying, "Georgie, do you want it or do you need it?" And he said, "I want it, and I can afford it. And in the long run," he got really quiet. He said, "I probably don't have the long run, do I?" I said, "No, Daddy, I don't think you do." But he didn't get a Prius. I was going to get one. I didn't get one either. Come on in.
I found you.
Yay!
Oh my God.
Congratulations. So then I started thinking about all of the mothers that I've had and the stories that they've told me, and mostly the things that have stuck with me, the things that they've said. Like my grandmother, who was a seamstress, said, "Make every fault a fashion." I love it too. And my other grandmother, who was about this tall, really Irish, and we figure she had lied about her age when she immigrated from Canada. And anytime anybody would talk about age, she'd say, "Oh, good God, kid, what do we don't want to talk about age." See, yeah. And that's, I think, what we'll find tonight. We're going to do some things where we have a chance to remember and to remember that thing that our mom said, or if it wasn't our mom, maybe it was somebody else who was momming us. I'm remembering tonight Tim Flummerfelt, who mommed me a few times and said things and sang things that I still remember. So anybody's mother say, "Clean your plate"? There are starving children in Africa or China. I have a friend who told me he used to say, "Wrap it up, Mom, I'll pay the postage." You know what? That would have not gone over with in my family. There would have been a wait till your father gets home. You're crying now? Let me give you something to cry about. This is really one that will date me. As I went out the door, do you have a dime in your pocket for a phone call? That was years and years and years and years and years ago. So what we're going to do tonight is that we're going to do some pairs, some what we call an interplay babbling. It's very easy to do, very short instructions, and you at home get to do it too. You'll be in a little room, little box with one other person. And I'm going to give you number one. You decide, first of all, who's number one and who's number two. You make sure that you know one another's names. And then I will give you something. If there's an odd number, raise your hand if you need a partner. Okay, so make sure you know one another's names. Yeah, that's fine. Or threes if you can't count to two. Are we? Okay, and Stet's going to put the rest of you who are at home, he's going to put you in a room with somebody else. So be aware that you'll be there shortly. He's working on it. You don't have to go anywhere, you just have to stay right where you are. Okay? Is everybody in a room?
Not yet.
Not yet. He's working on it. So be thinking as you're waiting about either your mom or somebody who mommed you. And think about something that they used to say all the time. The first thing that comes to my mind is leave your brother alone. Okay.
You want us to share amongst ourselves?
Yeah, you can go ahead and here while we're still getting in. So your time starts now. And one at a time.
You'll never see my trotting horse. Trotting horse. So then, just something doesn't look right. It's kind of like making a law of fashion. You'll never be seen on a trotting horse. Just keep going. You'll never notice.
Do it right, and I'm right. You can say things like,
Those of you at home, if you're in a room, decide who's number one, who's number two. Say your names, and then number one, go ahead and start. What do you remember?
that's all I see. About 5 of those things. I had one conversation with and then he was get stuff done, pay attention. She was never pregnant. He came from very tough and he was tail gunner and
Okay, number one, your time is up. Number two,
that may be number one. My dad was like that before he was married.
When you're in your room, go ahead and start. One.
That really stuck
But
with
he
me.
didn't hate them, no, he was covering their butts, he was doing,
She was taking her son
they were a team and he was one of the reconnaissance in World War II. Yeah, low enemy territory, first planes out. You know, you don't have that kind of thing if you're in planes. That way.
And my mom would head down with
Well, it was a very small group. Oh. In the Pacific. I don't know how many, I have a picture of one. Was it five?
Okay, wrap it up.
And he wasn't using them to make formulation.
And as long as my mom didn't see it, it was fine.
Well, did I also, I found out my mother was alcoholic.
Anybody want
Meeting is being recorded.
We're back.
Someday we'll have this all figured out, and then it will all change.
To talk to each other?
Did you get a chance to talk to each other?
Use Zoomers.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if you didn't, we will try it again sometime. So you just missed some wonderful stories.
Great, that's the way I make it feel. You're great.
And I'll tell you one last one about my mother and father and the stories that they lived and told, or lived to tell about. They flew to Ireland in their probably 70s. And they argued all the way about whether or not they were going to rent a car. My mother said, "You cannot rent a car, George, you can't." And she would start calling him George. And then she'd say, I'm not going to say it. Anyway, the words would escalate until she got to usually either the B word or the SOB word. "George, you can't drive." They drive on the wrong side of the road, and all of the equipment stuff is on the wrong side of the road. I can drive. I've been driving since I was 12. I drove a tractor. So they got to the airport, and of course he got his way. So they rented a car, got in the car. Fits and starts, they got to the exit. They got out the exit, came to the first light, it changed to red. He stopped, the car died. He started again, trying to figure out where the gears are, got it going, and it went and stopped again. My mother's saying, "George, I told you couldn't do this." And of course, now he's going to do it. So he gets it again in gear, and the light is changed, and he starts to go, and it changes to red. And it stops. My mother looks in the rearview mirror, and she said, "George, there's a big truck driver coming up behind you." Not in his truck, but on the road. And he got to the door and he went like this. My dad rolled down the window, started to say, "I'm doing the best I can." Didn't get that out. The guy says, "I say, laddie, are you waiting for a particular shade of green?" That was their welcome to Ireland. So, thank you, and enjoy Mother's Day. If you are mothers, think of something you can say that your kids will remember.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Billy. You always tell great stories, and I'm sure we all remember our mothers very kindly because they were very kind to us, because here we are, right? So next up is Rebecca Holm, all the way from Walla Walla, to lead off as one of our first featured tellers tonight. So here's Rebecca.
No.
Hi there. Hi, you guys. It's really great to be here. I'm so happy.
And I'm happy that the sun is shining, and it was a great drive over from Walla Walla. And just to see all these sunny faces here is really precious. And also to all you folks in the boxes. It's really good to see you two tiny boxes on the Zoom. I was going to tell you one of the very first stories that I recorded so many years ago. It's a story that was written by Jane Yolen. And you may know her, a children's author. I made the mistake once of saying that I asked her how she was so prolific. And she became irate with me in front of a large group of people at a library and said, if you are going to use the words, you need to know exactly what they mean. I am not prolific. Someone who is prolific is just throwing things out. I am abundant, or some such. So Jane, with all your kind permission, I will tell my version of this story of yours. There was a young girl, and her mother and her father loved her dearly, and they cared for her well and grew her up as a fine young woman. She was cherished in the community. She was treasured in her family. She had much to share and much to give. But still, inside of her, there was just this little moment of longing, this spot of emptiness inside of her. And the girl wondered and pondered and searched and thought. And finally, she came to her parents and said, I need to travel. I need to leave this place, and I need to go out and see more. And her parents, with that bittersweet joy and sorrow that parents have when they see their children fly off, blessed her and said, yes, go, search, be happy, find what you can. And so the girl took off, and she walked and she walked, and this was before Uber. She walked and she walked. She walked away from her home. She walked away from her community. She walked away from that whole countryside that she had known so well. Day after day after day, she walked. She walked through the fields. She walked through the desert land, the scabby, dry country. She walked up and into the mountains. And from that peak, she could see the end of the land there, not too far away. She could see the water meeting the land. And she thought, I have traveled so far, and still this feeling, this inside of me, this longing. And she rested there in that place again that night, pondering what she would do. And in the morning, when the sun came up there behind her and shone up over the top of the mountains and out across the land to the water, she heard the sweetest voice singing out across the air, a melody being carried there so beautifully. And the girl thought, oh, what is this? Who is this? This may be what I was looking for. And so she followed the sound, and she followed it there, up into the hills, up through the crags, up through the rocks, until she came to a cave. And there was a woman there inside of that cave. And the woman was
old and gnarled. I'm telling you, okay? But this woman was carrying the years of every day she had lived. And she was bent. Her skin had been drenched in sun and burnt, whipped by wind and rain. Her hair had not been cared for. Her teeth had fallen out. But she sang this beautiful voice. And the girl said, "Grandmother, I have been searching for so many days, looking for something. Could I stay here with you? Would you take me in?" And the woman said, "Yes, child, you can stay with me. You can stay with me for a year and a day." And so the girl did. She stayed there in the cave with the woman for a year and a day and a day and a day and a day, learning all that she could from the woman. Oh, they would sit in the morning sun. The woman was teaching her the words of the song, the melody that carried across the air. The woman was teaching her how to notice the world out around her and listen to the sounds that were so soft and delicate until your ear was tuned, and then they were a symphony when you listened. The girl sat there by the evening fire and listened to the woman's stories and saw the images in her mind and dreamed her own dreams. And when the time had passed, a year and a day, the woman said, "It is time now, child, for you to carry on. You need to go on your own journey and carry what you know with you." And the girl said, "Grandmother, I have learned so much with you. And I have no words, I have no way to thank you for everything that has happened here. Is there anything that I can do to carry on for you like this?" And the woman said, "Yes, child. When you tell them about me, tell them I am beautiful." I always wondered about that, and I said it before, I didn't know exactly. Yeah, it is truth beautiful, or is it just how we choose to look at it? And there we see the beauty, Tell them the truth, tell them I'm beautiful. Now, I wasn't particularly that girl, though there are some ways that my heart kind of carries on with that one of that searching, that longing, that wanting to go, that wanting to travel and see. My mother had a lot to do with that. My mother, some of you have heard this before from me, that when I was 8 years old, I was living on a farm in Jessup, Iowa, and my mother, a school teacher, she had been a one-room school teacher way back in the day, and handbell rung her bell. She decided that her family needed to go see the world, all in one place, at the Seattle World's Fair in 1962. And so we loaded into the green Buick LeSabre with the big side fins and traveled across the country, from the Iowa prairies out across the Dakota fields, wheat fields, the open lands, up across the Rocky Mountains that still had snow on them in July. What? I never knew that anywhere in the world there was still snow until we came to Seattle. Now, this was wonderful. We did see the world, and an 8-year-old kid going, oh, look at the little glass wind chimes from the Japanese exhibit, and look at the flamenco dancers in at the Spanish hall, and look at all of the wonderful places there are in the world that a person could go to, and a person could go and see an adventure. 8 years old, I was like, yes, I'll go there, everywhere, anywhere. But it was the last night that we were going to be at the World's Fair. My middle sister, my older sister, she was had just finished her junior year in high school, right? And so she and I were together, and my mom and my stepdad, who was a significantly younger man, told us that we should just sit on this bench here and wait for them. At the base of the Space Needle. So we're sitting there waiting. I'm 8 years old, running around. I'm stamping out cigarettes that people are throwing on the ground. My sister is talking to some strange young boy that came up and was making conversation. And we sat and we waited and we waited and we waited. And we were good girls. You think we were going to get in trouble, didn't you? I heard all of you go, uh-huh. No, we were good Iowa farm girls. We stayed there on the bench where we were supposed to be until my mother and father came back. And then we found out the only reason that they had left us there so long was because he wanted to go to the girly shows down on the Midway. Job. He finally had to admit it. And of course, my sister was irate. And of course, I was, well, just ecstatic for being somewhere other than in an Iowa cornfield, because I'm only 8. Life looks great. But I always thought, you know, we never did get to go up in that Space Needle. Oh. We sat there, oh no, it's too late. There's no time. We can't go up there now. He was afraid of heights too, my stepdad was. So all those years, many, many years, until I was a young woman, I traveled once again from the Iowa cornfields, hitchhiking part of the way out to the west, out to Oregon. And long story short, that so many of you already know about, I met a young man who grew up in Seattle, and one of the very first dates that Dale Hong took me on was to the base of the Space Needle. And then he said, so, do you want to go up for a ride? And we sat there in the revolving restaurant. And I had a very fancy cocktail in a flower vase with the Space Needle top on it and a little candle burning. So I finally did get my trip up to the top of the Space Needle. Sometimes you just gotta wait for good things to happen, you know? Yeah. Things. So this is a new story that I'm working on. So if you guys are all willing to hear it through with me and work with me with it. This is one of Billy's favorite authors, I think, Natalie Babbitt, from the Devil's Storybook. And this one just seemed like the perfect story to tell for this theme of, you know, tight spots, wrong turns and bumpy roads, right? But, Natalie calls it signposts. Yeah. You see, there was this couple, a young man and a young woman, who really thought that they were oh so wonderfully in love. But they just couldn't quite seem to get along right. It just wasn't working. But they were in love, by golly. But they would argue. They would have quarrels. They would argue about everything. They would argue about where they were going to park the car. They would argue about whether they should have chicken or beef for dinner. They would argue about every little thing, about whether he should shave his beard or not, whether where they would go for that evening. Did they want to listen to jazz or did they want to listen to classical? I mean, it was everything. Everything was always just the most insignificant things, right? Did you put the water on for tea? I told you I wanted tea. Why didn't you put some water? I'm not putting the water on for tea. You put on the water. They just seem to want to fight. And maybe you know couples like this. They fight and then they make up. Yeah, it's kind of part of the whole, well, this is how they were. They would fight, and then they would make up again because they were in love. And then they would fight again, and then they would make up. And it would go back and forth like this. Until one day, it was the worst argument that they had ever had. And so William, he said, Flora, I am leaving. I'm going to Argo for 7 days. And if you want to be married, you can come to me in 7 days. Send a message to me in 7 days and let me know that we could marry. Otherwise, if I don't hear from you, then that's it. I'm off. And Flora, she said, you can go to Argo for 7 days and as long as you want. You're the one that starts all the arguments. And so off William went, there down the road on his way to Argo. Well, as he was going down the road, you see, it comes to a spot where the road forks. And one fork goes to Argo and the other fork goes to Woolfield. And as William said, he took the right fork, the fork to the right, to go to Argo and stayed at the inn there. Now, time went by. He stayed there 3 days, 4 days. Now, in the meantime, the devil had come up into the world. And you know, the devil likes to play a little mischief and stir things up a bit. The devil happened to be walking down that very same road, and when he came to the fort there, where the road divided, he saw the sign that pointed to Argo. He saw the sign that pointed to Woodfield, and he said, oh, here's some fun. And he changed the arrows around. So now it appeared that Argo was to the left and Woodfield was to the right. The days, 3 days had gone by, 4 days had gone by. And Flora, she started to pine and say, oh, I do miss him. He is really quite sweet. And actually, I could do better. And so Flora hired a messenger. Flora hired a messenger to take a note there to Argo. Take a note to William and tell him, yes, if you come back, we could be married, and I will try my best not to argue. Oh, the messenger mounted his steed and rode off down the road. But when he came to the fork, he was on his way to Argo. And of course, the sign pointed to the left, and the messenger went off to the left to go look for William. Oh, in the meantime, William is there pining away, waiting for Flora, thinking, really, she is quite lovely. Really, I would like us to be together. Really, I do miss her oh so much. And I'm just going to swallow my pride and go back. And so he starts down the road. Now, over there with the messenger, he searched high and low. He looked through every room at the inn. He talked to everyone. No one had seen William. Oh, so the messenger sat to have an ale and revive himself a bit there. And then he started back on the road to deliver the bad news to Flora and say, I'm sorry. Oh, he must have already left. William has gone. He's not there in Argo. And William, as he's coming down the road, he comes to the signs and he says, oh, how did I make such a wrong turn? Here I've been in Woolfield all these days waiting for a message, and really, this is Argo. I need to be here. And so he went to Argo, which is really the Woodfield, which is Woolfield, which is so confusing. And he would have met the messenger, except the messenger needed to refresh his horse and relieve himself there in the stream off to the side of the road. And so they passed. William waited 3 more days there in the fake Argo. And Flora, she waited 3 more days to have William come back to her at home. And when the 7th day had passed, William said, well, I guess that's it. I'm just going off to the city to make my fortune, meet my future, maybe meet a bride. And Flora said, well, if that's just how he's going to be, I guess I'll just choose and marry someone else. And he did, and she did. Now, William, he went on, and he met a lovely lady named Belle. They were married, and he never, ever dreamed of ever having an argument with her because they were so perfectly in tune with each other. And Flora, well, by coincidence, she met a wonderful man named Carl. And they had no arguments with each other ever, not a single quarrel. But the devil down there in the hot spot heard something about these 2 wonderful couples that never, ever quarreled with each other. He had forgotten all about the signposts. But now there were 2 wonderful couples that were so blissfully happy. And the devil said, you know, that is just disgusting. How can such a thing ever happen? The devil's work. That's it. I'm gonna let Pat go next. Thank you, guys. We're running a little bit and we'll cut it short.
If you had another one, we'd do that, and then we could take a break and then have Pat, if you wanted to do that.
No, I think she's ready. Are you ready, Pat? Yep. This is all improv tonight anyway. We're in a new location. We got new things happening. We're trying new stuff. All right. Pat.
I'm there. I'm here. I'm here. There you are.
Yes.
There she is.
Thank you very
Oh,
much.
I got to turn, wait a minute. I got to turn my camera around. Hang on. Time for a technical assist. How did that happen? It was okay, and then it wasn't. Pa-bum. There we are. Now now I have to get back to you. Do I not?
On your camera.
Okay, let me go back to here, to the Zoom meeting and open. Oh, okay, there we are. There we are. I'm 81 years
Well-
old. Don't tell me I'm not still teachable about some things. Well, thank you, Rebecca. I love I love your road stories. And when Rebecca asked me some time ago if I would be interested in joining her tonight, I wasn't too sure, but I do love road stories, and I love them for a variety of reasons. You know, and we all have them. We had them early on. I don't know about you, but when I was young, an only child, and my father was in the military, and we would go from one part of the country to the other quite often in the summertime, from one duty station to another. And this one particular summer, I remember, I don't know the year, but I remember the car. It was a green and yellow Chevy. And I was in the back seat, vinyl seats, no seat belts, of course. And there I'd be by myself with a large dog and my funny books. And I remember no air conditioning, and I remember how insufferably hot it would be. And rolling down a window did not help. And so I'd try to get from one side of the car to the other, over the dog or under the dog, to get a little bit of shade. And my father didn't ever like to stop for anything. And so I would be there looking out the window, and I'd see signs coming up, petting zoo. And I'd say, "Oh, Dad, can't we stop?" No, that's just trash. No, we're not going to stop there. And then we got close to Yellowstone Park one time, and I said, "Please, can't we see?" He said, "We'll see." So we drove into the visitor center, and I'll never forget, they had a great big clock there that said when Old Faithful was due to erupt. And lucky for me, it was going to be in 10 minutes. And my father said, "I guess we can spare the time." Well, I will tell you, when I got married, my husband was not a fan of roadside attractions. He liked historical things. And early on, we were in Montana, and they have these wonderful wooden signs with great historical information burned into them. They were really classy and very lovely, and we would stop for those, but that was it. And so when I was older, 45, and did my first real trip by myself on an airplane, rented a car, flew to Tennessee to the National Storytelling Festival, and camped the first time, I discovered the wonder of roadside attractions. And let me tell you, in Tennessee, they have roadside attractions, the like of which we have never even heard of out here. And I managed to experience many of them, and I've never forgotten them. While I was by myself for many of those trips, I have had the pleasure of meeting up with Rebecca outside of Pendleton. I would be on my way from Seattle down to Baker, Oregon, to visit my Aunt Madge. And Rebecca would come from Walla Walla. And we would meet up outside of Pendleton at the Wild Horse Casino. Let me be quick to tell you, we were not going anywhere near that casino. Our destination was the truck stop next to it. Now, I have an abiding love of truck stops. There are interesting people who go into truck stops, truckers certainly among them, but other people as well. One of my best experiences at a truck stop was when I was getting gas on one side of the pump, and there was a great big, one of those big old rumbly trucks on the other side. And I was kind of standing there waiting, and I was kind of watching, and the truck driver was, well, he was kind of a small man, but he was kind of whistling to himself. And as I was waiting for the squeegee to do my windshield, I kind of walked around and I looked up, and he had one of those great big horns coming out over the hood. And I said, "That's quite a horn." He said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "You know, I've always wanted to sound one of those things." And he said, "Well, little lady, you just come over here and climb on up." Let me tell you, when he said climb on up, I had no idea what it took to get into one of those cabs. I didn't have to go all the way in. I could stand kind of on the top step. And he said, "Now just pull that chain that comes down." It was wonderful. A lot of people at the gas station were a little bit startled. It was an experience I will never forget. But now let me take you inside the truck stop. Some people might think that the merchandise inside a truck stop is of no quality whatsoever. Let me tell you that in a truck stop, you will find items you are not likely to find anyplace else. One time when we stopped there, I found over by the candy section a sucker. It was imported from Mexico, and it was of a scorpion encased in sugar candy. You know, I didn't buy it. And when I went back the next time, they didn't have any. And when I asked the young girl behind the counter about it, she looked at me with the most unusual expression. Rebecca and I find delight in a lot of the art at truck stops. There are things put on wood, covered over with heavy urethane plastic of horses racing across the plain, or wolves, a lot of wolves, or some Native American items, and lots of t-shirts. Rebecca and I have talked, and someday we are going to have t-shirts made that say truck stop gals. It's lovely to share a love of the finer things of life with a good friend. That makes the journey well worthwhile. Well, the story I want to share with you now came about as a result of one of my trips back to Tennessee. I was on my way to Knoxville to turn in my car and fly back to Seattle. And I was outside of town, and I thought, you know, I think I should gas up here. It'll probably be cheaper. And then I realized that I had packed all my reading material in my suitcase, and I knew it was going to be a long wait at the airport, a long flight. I needed something to read. And so here was this little mom and pop gas station. As I was going, I didn't see any 7-Elevens or AM, PM, mini marts, anything like that. This was just a little gas station by the side of the road. There was a sign that said, and this is the truth, "Eat here and get gas." And so I thought, okay. So I pulled in, and a young man came out and filled the gas tank up. And so I went inside, and I opened the screen door, and took a little look around. Now, I knew right away I was in the South. And let me tell you why. Because on the counter was a large glass jar with pickled pig parts in it. I knew that for a fact because one thing I do when I am in different parts of the country is go into grocery stores. And I had spent time at the Piggly Wigglies in Tennessee, and there were pig parts everywhere. Now I was hungry, and right next to that jar was the hot case with the rollers going around, with the hot dogs that had probably been there for quite a while. So I got some chips and some candy bars and a moon pie and called it good. And on my way out the door, I saw a big spinner rack. I had looked to see if they had magazines or something, and I couldn't see any. This spinner rack had a hand-printed sign on the top that said, "Used books." So I gave it a spin, and this one particular title caught my eye. I picked it up. It was an old paperback, let me tell you, but it was the cover and the title that got my attention. It said, "Ladies and Cats Mysteries." And so I bought it. And the price was half. And on the back of the book, the price was 95 cents. So I paid 50 plus cents plus a few pennies tax. And I took it with me. Now I opened it up when I was sitting at the airport. And the first thing I thought was, this is an old book. You know how an old paperback, the pages will be kind of yellow, and there's a certain smell from an old paperback. And I read this story. I cannot recall the author. I do not know what happened to that book, but I'd be delighted to share this story with you tonight. It was one of those nights, all dark and wet and gloomy. And Maggie Cronin was standing out on the front steps of her apartment building, holding in her hands a leash and a collar, looking up and down the street, calling out, "Tommy, oh, Tommy, won't you come home? Don't you know it's late and it's all dark? And I've got your dinner all ready for you. Oh, please, Tommy." And on the second floor, right at the window where they spent most of their time, were the O'Malley sisters, Mary Alice and Catherine, sitting there framed by the lace curtains on either side. Now, these two sisters felt they had a special dispensation to keep track of all the people going in and out of that building and to make comments on how they lived their lives. They felt they had that because their brother was a priest, don't you know? And so one of them turned to the other and said, "Do you see her now? Standing there, calling out for that ratty old tomcat of her. Tommy, 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 Tommy. Have you seen what he looks like? He only has one ear. And his tail's been broken so many times, it looks like the letter Z. And oh, she just loves that cat. She keeps him inside almost all the time, but every now and then he gets out. And when he does, she goes traipsing out, up and down the streets, usually at night after him. And I've told her, if I've told her once, I've told her so many times. Don't you know, there have been stranglings down by the docks by big men, much bigger and stronger than you. And look at you, you're a wisp of a thing. You shouldn't be going out at all, except maybe early in the morning when things are nice and quiet. Oh, I know, said her sister, I know. And do you see how thin she is? Look at her hands all with the arthritis. She can hardly move them. Now, I don't like to be judgmental of people, but I was at the market just this morning and I take a little look in her basket just to see what she's buying. And I look and I ask, and what she's got. She's got a nice piece of chicken all wrapped up. That'd be for Tommy. And a bottle of cream. That'd be for Tommy. And then I look and I don't ask, but I cannot help but notice that over in the corner is some bread wrapped up and it says day old. That's for her, I'm sure. And some produce that has seen much better days, but nothing but the best for Tommy. Nothing but the best for Tommy. Ha! I tell you something, that woman, if she only had a proper cat, like a Siamese or a Persian, it would have had a little class to the building, but oh no, that raggedy old tomcat. Well, Maggie stood there, and while she couldn't hear what they were saying, she had a pretty good idea. But Tommy, her sweet Tommy, when she found him, oh, he was much raggedier than he even looked now. And it took a while for her to coax him to come to her, to talk to him sweet, and then to give him food. And after a while he came, and then he came inside. And at first he would only cower under the stove. And then after a while he came out and he'd sit on the arm of her chair. And then finally he came onto her lap and he purred. And the first time that happened, that cat filled a space in her heart that had been empty for so long. Oh, she loved her Tommy. But he did vex her sometimes, like when he went out tonight. She had his dinner all ready. The chicken was all, the fish she had, not chicken, it was fish. And she had cooked it and taken all the bones out. But don't you know, a cat could choke on a fish bone. And the cream was in a saucer being warmed on the back of the stove. And there he was out, who knows where. Well, she thought, I'm just going to have to go find him. And so she stepped off the step and stood looking up the street and down the street. Now, by this time, indeed, it was dark, and there was sort of a halo of mist around the lights, the lamp lights. And she called, Tommy, oh, Tommy, won't you come home? Your supper's all ready for her. And she thought, maybe he's gone down by the docks. Now, those fishermen, they liked Tommy. They said he had come from a derelict boat down there, and they'd seen him for a long time until he finally made his way up to what they call the good life, but they still cared for him. So oftentimes he'd go down there and they'd throw him a bit of fish at night. And so she thought that's where she might look first. And so she started down, holding on to that leash, calling out, Tommy. And she went by an alley and heard a rustle back by the dustbins. Oh, Tommy, is that you? Oh, please tell me you're not back there eating trash and garbage from somebody else's kitchen. But no, it wasn't Tommy. It was the figure of a man. And as she stepped down in the alley, he kind of came out from behind the dustbin, and he was so large, he blocked all the light at the end of the alley. Oh, he was a huge man. And she said, excuse me, have you seen my cat? His name is Tommy. He has one ear and a tail kind of like a Z. Have you seen him? And the man looked down at her and said, a cat. You're looking for a cat. What's the matter with you? Don't you know this is not a safe place to be? There have been stranglings down by the docks. You ought to be home, somewhere safe and sound. What's the matter with you? Where are your people? She said, I don't have any people. I have Tommy. She said, a cat. You're one of those cat ladies. Well, my mother was one of those. Oh, yeah. I lived with her. Yeah. And she had this fluffy white cat named Sweetums or something like that. I hated that cat. It got fur all over me. And she was always talking so sweet to it. Well, one time, Sweetums got out, and I saw to it that she never came back. And after a while, I decided that my mother would be much better off in a home someplace, and so I put her there. Yeah, her and Sweetums. And now I have the place all to myself, without any cat or Falderall. And somebody ought to put you away as well, you and your cat. And he turned and began walking down towards the docks. Maggie had to stand on tiptoe to flip that leash up and over his head and around his neck, where she held and pulled it tight, even with her arthritis in her hands. It was always the element of surprise that did them in. And she stood there and waited and watched until he slipped down to those slimy cobblestones. And when he was still, she unwrapped the leash from around his neck and reached in his jacket pocket and took out his billfold and opened it up. Oh, quite a lot of money, which she carefully removed and tucked into the sleeve of her coat. And then she took his identification and put it back in the coat pocket, so someone could notify his dear old mother, if she had a wish to know. And so she could possibly move back into her apartment. And then she reached down and unwound the leash from around his neck. And just then there came a from down the alley. And there he was, her Tommy. Oh, she said, Tommy, shame on you, you naughty boy. You gave me such a fright. It's time for dinner. And she reached down and picked him up, held him close, and then slipped the collar around his neck and said, oh, it's time we were away to home. And she looked down and said, you know, Tommy, I suppose there are some who think that what we do is wicked. But after all, it's the high price of cat food.
Oh my God.
Fantastic. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Pat. I don't think I'll ever go in a truck stop again without thinking about you. And looking through this stuff and looking at those old paperback books and the VHS tapes, which I think at Matlock, where I'm from, I think they still got those in the general store. The boxes are kind of worn and everything, but you still got them. So anyway, thank you for that travel story, and I think we'll all enjoy that. So anyway, some great stories. Let's see if those of you coming on for the story swap can kind of match some of that, okay? The challenge is there. So let's take a 5-minute break and then come back, okay? Restrooms are down the hall, and look forward to you all being here. Got everybody muted? Got everybody muted? Okay, well, here we are back again with just a few commercial announcements that we always have to do. And the first one is, okay, all right, the first commercial announcement is, we are running short of money that we need, and my baby needs new shoes. So please cough up some money. And I've actually got a hat over there, which you can throw money in discreetly if you'd like to. And I've got a real large head, so it's a big hat. So let's try to fill it up tonight. And for those of you out in Zoom land, southsoundstory.org is our website. Darn it, please go to it and look at it, because Mitch keeps us up to date with all sorts of good news on what's going on and our great storytellers that we've got. Just as a reminder, a few things coming up. On the 14th of June, our next story event here will be at the Harbor House across the way, and Mitch will be the the main teller that night. See, a few other announcements. Matthew from our group was a Story Oli winner last week here in Olympia, last month, I'm sorry. And in May, on 16th, this May 16th, on a Tuesday at the Brotherhood, which is a great pub right down at the corner, there's going to be another Story Oli night down there. So that's always a great time. So come and see that. So again, go to that southsoundstory.org and you can donate money through there, or we'll take cash, checks, Bitcoins, anything that you might happen to have. I think that's it. Stories in the Park, Stories in the Dark is coming up in August over at Priest Point, Squaxin Park. And that's always a great event. So that will be on Saturday, August the 12th, about 7 o'clock at night. Okay, any other announcements, anybody? Okay, that's good. We don't want to hear the clinking of the money, just the soft rustle there.
Dad?
That's good.
Dad?
So tonight, one of the first storytellers I ever heard, other than Billy, and I still remember these stories, and I won't tell them what it is, where Billy and Randy were telling stories. So there's Randy tonight with another great story, and I really like your new hairdo too.
Oh, thank you.
So enjoy it.
Am I in the right spot? Back up a little more. Okay. I'm looking at the red eye here. Okay, so I got this little note that said that the theme for tonight was rocky roads, wrong turns, and some other thing. And I thought, oh, I bet you I can come up with some kind of story like that. So I did. I thought of one today. So once upon a time, long time ago, in 1975, I was 25 years old. I had a boyfriend who later was a husband. And he was a climber, a mountain climber, a rock climber. In fact, when he was a kid, well, in high school and in college, in the early 60s, he and his cousin would try to spend the summers at Yosemite National Park, camped out and getting in as much climbing as they possibly could. He and his cousin would hitchhike from Yakima down to Yosemite. One time they actually rode on a train, or, hopped on a train, well, without paying, that kind of hopping on the train. And they had no car, no money. They just took their backpacks and their tent and their climbing ropes and their special shoes. And by the time I met him, he already was kind of well known among the rock climbing community in Washington State. He had some first ascents and he'd climb Mount Rainier. Well, when he was going to Yosemite, when he was still in school, but summertime, the whole thing of rock climbing, as we know now, that whole sport was really kind of new. And there were a whole bunch of young men, I don't know if there were any women, but a bunch of young men, high school, college, hippies hanging, well, it was kind of early for hippies, hanging around, who camped at this one campground at Yosemite National Park for the summer. And they just shared stories and they climbed as much as they could. And apparently they ate a lot of rice-a-roni over a stove, because when we were married, I was never allowed to actually buy rice-a-roni because he'd had enough of that. And in fact, the climbing thing was so new that there were no rangers and no emergency personnel working for Yosemite National Park that knew how to rescue people off the side of a mountain. So if somebody fell, whether they were hiking or climbing, and people were trying to climb Half Dome and El Capitan and other places. But if anybody needed to be rescued, they'd hire some of these boys or young men from this camp to do some of the work, to get rescue. And one time when I was spent time with Tom's cousin Meade, who was the cousin that went with him when they'd go down there. He said, I'll always remember the first time I took a dead body out of the mountains. It was pretty serious stuff. Well, a few years later, we got together. So it was 1975. And And I had tried hiking before I met him, and I didn't really like it. The whole idea of going zigzagging back and forth for hours in the forest, and then getting to the top of where you were going to stay and looking, oh, look at that pretty lake, and then someone say, okay, now we have to get back before it gets dark. It's like, why did we do this? You know, that's kind of my experience with hiking. But of course, I was in love, so I tried some of it. I tried some, and he climbed a lot and did all kinds of things with his friends and some of his other climbing friends. But I wanted to learn a little bit about it. So he started to teach me how to do the boulder climbing. And I don't know how much, I tried to look up some of this stuff today, and there's so many different kinds of climbing now, way more than we ever talked about. But I was learning the really basics of it. Go there, like a boulder that might be as high as that ceiling. And I learned about, I had my own robes and my own special shoes. And I had like carabiners and the nuts and the pitons and all that stuff. And I learned about climbing and putting my fingers and my toes in these different places and climbing up. And he would belay me from above or belay me from below. And he was very safety conscious, extremely safety conscious. In fact, I learned things like if you spilled something on one of those ropes, it could be ruined. If it got any chemical on it, it might look fine, but if you fell and that rope was supposed to hold you up, there'd be damage in that rope and it might snap and you'd be a goner. So he was very, very careful with all this stuff. So I really trusted him, and he was a good teacher. Well, we decided this in 1975 that we were going to go all the way to the Yucatan and back. We had 4 months to travel. We got a Volkswagen van and we kind of fixed it up. Well, it was a Volkswagen like bus, you know, the basic. And we put a few things into it to make it sort of a camper. And we had a special place. I don't know if you've ever had one of those old vans, but there's kind of a triangular shaped place that was the special place for the ropes that were all in like pillowcases, so they didn't touch anything, so that they would be safe. But on the way to Mexico, we stopped at Yosemite National Park, where Tom's cousin, Meade, and his wife, Tina, were full-time rangers at Yosemite Park. Now, Meade was like, oh, maybe that tall. And his wife, Tina, was like about that tall. And she was in really great shape. She didn't really climb, but she hiked like crazy, and she did all this kind of teaching there at the park. And in the winter, they were the winter rangers up at Tuolumne, however you say that area. So they had to cross-country ski to get any place. So she was in great shape. And she was just learning to climb a little bit herself. But when we went there to visit them, and the guys, you know, did some climbing. I can't remember whether they went on Half Dome or El Capitan that time, but they'd been on a lot of these climbs, and they did a lot of stuff they liked. But we finally decided that we would all go climbing. We would go camping in one of these places out in Tuolumne, and then we'd climb, and they'd take the girls. I said, well, I don't know, I don't know how to really do. Oh, we'll find you, we'll pick a really good place and we'll climb. And they talked about it, they knew where they were gonna go. So we went to this place, this big wall of rock with all the cracks and stuff in it that I was familiar with. The guys picked out the place. They put one of us, well, one couple was at kind of here, and another one was maybe, I don't know, 10, 20 feet away. So we each had our own little place. And the guys they climbed partway up. As they were going up, they were showing us where they were putting their feet and their hands, which was only slightly helpful because Meade's legs were probably as long as his whole wife's body, but you know, we tried to learn from that. And we were doing our little belaying, keeping everything right so that in case they fell, which of course they didn't because they were really good at this. And then they got partway up, and then it was our turn to do it. And it was very exciting and very hard. And I wasn't very strong, and Tina even was struggling. But we kept going up, and then it was their turn to go higher, and then our turn to go higher. Well, we never went above the guys, but our turn to catch up with them. And we were doing great, but it was taking a long time. And we were really tired. And it was kind of starting to like cloud over or something a little bit, kind of getting, later in the day. This is October, it wasn't summertime. And so the guy said, it's taken longer than we thought, so I think we better hurry up. So we're gonna help get you up a little bit faster. So what we did was we still had to climb, but then when it was our turn, or they climbed up another section, and then when it was our turn to climb, we had to put our feet in the right place, but then they would kind of lift us up a little bit so that we didn't have to actually climb as much. We still climbed, but it went up a lot faster. And we finally got to the top of this giant cliff or wall or whatever it was. And there was this beautiful flat area all over. We got up there and it was fabulous. It was like a 360-degree turn of seeing all of Yosemite Park. And we saw lakes and other mountains and the whole Tuolumne Valley. It was beautiful. Oh, it was so nice. And then one of the guys said, okay, well, now it's time for us to go down. I was like, what? We just got up here. And I thought, is this going to be like that stupid hiking where you go zigzag, 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 high, and then you go back down? That's no fun. I said, what do you mean we're going to go down? And Meade says, well, did you by any chance feel any like kind of little buzz on your arm? Well, yeah, a little tingle. That's electricity, girls. There's a storm coming, and we have to get off the top of this flat, high mountain. I said, we can't just sit down and have a granola bar or something? No, we have to go. So I said, so now how are we going to get down? You're going to just like lower us down or something? And my husband said, oh, back up, okay. My husband said, no, we'll just go down the trail. I said, there was a trail to get up here? And I thought, well, maybe it was the wrong road taken, but here I am 50 years later almost telling you the story of my one time I actually climbed up the side of a mountain. So I guess it was a good thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I always enjoy your travel stories, and someday you'll have to tell us that one again about the time you and your sister sailed all the way to San Juan Islands with your dad, who refused to use the motor at all, and how long the trip was, and what you finally did to him at the end. But I'm not going to spoil the story because we want people to hear that story, and one of these days she will tell it again for us. So let's see, coming up now, we've got a couple of folks online would like to tell some stories, but in the meantime, Toby is going to tell a story about a wise old woman.
Thank you, Brett. I like it here.
I like it.
She has to move her arms.
I was at an elementary school library because I wanted to find an Asian folktale. So I'm looking through the shelf, and then, I'm not kidding, folks, this book just slid out in front of me. Now, what is this? So I pick it up. Oh, wise old woman. That's a great story. So I open the book, and it starts off with, Mukashi, long ago in Japan, there was a village that was nestled in a pine grove forest. But the village was ruled by a young and cruel lord who made this decree. Anyone who is 70 years and older are useless, and they need to go to the top of the mountain to die. Now, holy moly, I just turned 70. This book is talking to me. So the story continues on with this young lord who was not nice at all, made this decree. So you had this village lacking older people. There was no such thing as Panorama City in this area. So in the village, though, was a young farmer, and his mother was coming to that age. It was going to be her birthday. Saburo, he fretted about it. And finally, it was his mother's birthday. Saburo, you need to take me up to the mountain. Oh, Kazan, mother, I just can't do that. That is the way. You must take me up. So poor Saburo, his mother, come mother, get on my back, which she did. And off he went up the mountain, higher and higher, until the pine trees started to thin out and become little thin sticks. When he heard this, and he stopped. Okasa, mother, what is that noise? Oh, Salvador, I am breaking the twigs and putting them on the ground, so you'll be able to find your way at night. Oh, mother. So off they trudge, and they finally get to the top of the mountain, and he puts her down. Mother, I cannot leave you here. I'm going to take you back. I'll find another solution. So mother went back on the back of Saburo, and off they went down the mountain. Well, when they got back home, Saburo decided, I am going to dig up a hole in the kitchen. And that's what he did. He dug a huge cave where his mother lived. And she sewed and she weaved for 2 years. It was the fall, autumn of the second year when the leaves were turning that yellow and red color. And there she was, still sewing and weaving, when in the distance they could actually hear the hoofbeats of the samurai lord's palace. And the samurai stopped his horse. And he told the guard, go tell your master to come here. I have a decree from Lord Higa, who is the ruler of all this valley. So of course the guard got the young lord. Yes, what is the message? Well, I am to tell you and warn you, you have 3 sons, 3 moons before Lord Higa will come and take over your village and enslave all of you, unless you are able to solve 3 puzzles that the Lord has. The Lord Higa, he loved puzzles and riddles. So the samurai reached into a saddlebag, got a scroll, and just tossed it onto the ground, took his horse, and then galloped away. So the young lord, he takes the scroll and he reads it. Number 1, to make a coil of rope into ash. Number 2, to take a hollow, crooked branch and string it from one end to the other. And the 3rd, to have a drum make a sound without beating it. That's no problem. I'll have the 6 wise men in my village solve it. So he called the men over, and the men looked at the 3 puzzles. Your Highness, we'll try to figure it out. Maybe we could, no, the thread, but they couldn't figure it out. So they went to the top of the hill where the temple was, and there was this great big bronze bell, and they rang it, bong, bong. The air was silent. The gods did not answer or give them any reply. Let's go ask the animals. Animals are very wise. So they go into the forest, and there's this great big den where a tanuki badger lives. And the badger is very, very clever. And the badger came out with this bottle of sake. What is it that I can do to help you out? And they told him the problem. Tanuki looked at the 3 puzzles. this is very difficult, man. I'm sorry, I can't solve it. So the 6 wise men went back to their young lord. He was furious. Look at all this on that. Send him to the dungeon. And off they went. What was he to do? He needed to solve the 3 puzzles. So he made an announcement to the whole town. Whoever can solve these 3 puzzles will receive a bag of gold. Well, Saburo then came home very downcast. Saburo, what is the matter? You look so worried. Oh, Okasa, unless we solve these 3 puzzles, we are doomed. 3 puzzles? Come, what are they? He told her. So this one, Saburo, I want you to get me a rope, get me a hollow, crooked branch, get me a small drum. So he went through the village and got those items for his mother. So mother first took the rope and soaked it in salt water and made sure the rope was completely dry. Then she set it on fire when it was dry, and that rope made a coil of ash. Then she took the crooked branch, and she put a dab of honey on one end of the bench. And then the other end, she caught an ant, and she tied a thin piece of silk thread on the leg of that ant and set the ant free inside that hollow branch. And that ant screwing around here and there with his little feelers, it could tell there was something sweet at the end, and finally it did reach the honey. And the mother took that ant, untied the silk, and there it was, threaded from one end to the other. Then the drum. She took the small drum, peeled off a corner of the hide, and she caught a bee. And she took the bee and gently put it inside the drum, sealed it. And there that little bee, bong, bong, dong, 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 made a sound without having to beat it. So Saburo then took the 3 solutions to the young lord. The young lord was amazed. You are so young, and you came up with the solutions? Saburo had to tell the truth. Your lordship, actually, it was my mother, and he knew he could be thrown in jail. Your mother? Yes, my mother. She is 70 years old. So that's all. Thank goodness she is alive. Why, she has saved our village. Guards, release those 6 wise men, and no more decree that everyone is free to live their life here in this village. Saburo, you take the 3 solutions. You immediately go see Lord Higa, which he did. And behind him was a parade of samurais from the young lord. They went to the long hallway, and there was Lord Higa. It's very interesting. You solved the puzzles. Your little village, it is so full of wise people that you're I will leave your village in peace forever. I will not bother you at all. Now back at the village, the mother and Saburo met with the young lord, who gave them 3 bags of gold. They didn't have to worry about life at all anymore. And from that day on, that little village was known as the Village of the Wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Here we go. Anyway. I can do this. I get down, but I can't get back up. Okay, so anyway. Shane Lango from Seattle is on. and she was asking if she could tell a story remotely. We said, sure. And this is one she's working on for the Seattle Liars Contest. So she'll be doing that. I would just like to remind folks, if you do want to tell stories, you get the email, just send me an email real quick and let me know that you'd like to tell a story, and we'll be sure we get you in the lineup. But this will work out fine too. So Shane, are you ready to go with your story?
I am. Thank y'all very much. So in the early 1800s, mine was among the first of English descent to move their families westward from the United States of America into Mexico, where the government recognized the natural born rights and freedom of women, which is why the women in my family insisted that we move there. And with as much worldly possessions and peanut seeds as they could carry, we moved from Georgia to what is now called Texas. Now, being of the Methodist way of thinking and believing that folks could reason their way to God, we started a classical education college after Texas won her independence from Mexico, and we also became plantation peanut farmers in the new republic. My great-great-great-grandmother was the first woman to graduate from college in Texas and the first woman in our family who completely traded domestic gender roles with her husband. And she has a well-documented claim to be the first inventor of the mechanical peanut masher. Now, being the first woman to graduate college in Texas and being of the Methodist denomination and being of good pioneer stock and having very wide hips and an even temperament when she wasn't pushed past it, allowed my great-great-great-grandmother her pick of men. And she wanted one who was content to manage the household domestic responsibilities because she had already discovered her love and propensity for mechanics, agriculture, and nature. And she was not about to get stuck in the house for the rest of her days. Now, the man that she happened to find also loved chemistry and the alchemy of bacon and the blending of flavors. He liked the orderliness and the predictability of the indoors, and he was able to delegate all the responsibilities he didn't like. It turned out to be a match made in entrepreneurial heaven, with enough marital bliss that they had a lot of kids. And he also thought up the idea for the mechanical bread slicer, but that's another story. But with him slicing the bread and her peanut grinding machine, the open-faced peanut butter sandwich was born. But it did need a little something. So my GGGG Paul looked around and saw a berry that grew wild in Texas, and the first PB&J was made with agarita berry jam. And I tell you what, it was good. And they started to bring those sandwiches pre-made and now closed-faced for traveling purposes to picnics and socials and potlucks and dances and school lunches. Now, they seemed a little bit to be too happy a sandwich for funerals and wakes, and were kind of on the verge of appropriate for disaster relief scenarios. But those PB&JJ, jelly or jam, became such a novelty that everyone wanted one. And my great-grands opened their first peanut butter with jelly or jam sandwich restaurant and called it the Garden of Eden. And it employed all the family into the next couple of generations and became successful enough that they even had to hire people, even with all those kids. Now, in their plan to franchise, they wanted to patent my Gigi Ma's peanut masher and my Gigi Pa's bread slicer, but some other guys had already beat us to it. And in the hopes of having a residual passive income of proprietorship, my family tried unsuccessfully for years and years to patent the peanut butter and jelly or jam sandwich. They lost their fortune to the application and lawyer fees. Turns out people figured out that they could make their own sandwiches. I wonder if they'd been successful in that patent if we would have gotten a percentage of every peanut butter and jelly sandwich ever made. Oh, the futility of dreaming of fortunes that never were. Of course, those sandwiches didn't even taste as good as the ones from our restaurant, but homemade sandwiches caused that restaurant money to dry up too. Now, in 1976, our small town was awarded the distinction of the peanut capital of Texas, due greatly to our connection to the peanut farmers positioned in high places in government. Now, I'm not supposed to say too much about that. There have been speculations for years about the peanut mafia, but those are unsubstantiated rumors. Cross my heart. Now that year, we also found crowned our first peanut queen, judged on articulation, demeanor, and the ability to make the most crowd-pleasing peanut butter and jelly or jam sandwich of the year. Now, I am very proud to say that my family did petition, and within a few years after some serious convincing, one could be crowned the peanut queen, king, or whatever one's preference was. The early 80s. Oh. Now, one of the very notable winners of the inventor was the inventor of the Uncrustables brand that you can still find in the freezer section of your local grocery store. Now, my title of Peanut Queen, which is more coveted in my family than a legacy enrollment in Texas A&M with a football scholarship, was a hard-earned with a toasted 9-grain, creamy smooth peanut butter on both slices of bread, grape jelly, gently mixed with the wowza ingredient, sriracha. It's taken me years to learn how to pronounce that. Now, honey, I have inherited no patents, no royalties, no properties from my peanut butter ancestors, but for what it's worth, I do have this story. I forgot to time that. Did anybody happen to time it? You're muted.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think the problem with your patent was your family put the jelly on one slice of bread and peanut butter on the other and slapped them together. And really, we know the best way is to put the peanut butter on, then put the jelly on top of the peanut butter, then put the bread on top. So that's why your patent's no good. So other than that, we liked your story. That just for the future, what we'll try to do is with folks who are going to tell on Zoom, before we start the meeting, we'll have a little microphone check to make sure there's no interruptions in it. And if, as Judy pointed out, if there are, we'll just use the telephone call-in system to make sure that we can all hear you okay. But the parts we got the drift of the story. It was very good. It's very truthful story too, right? Sounds really good. I think Pam Maben wanted to give a little announcement before we quit too.
Yes. Thank you, Stet. I don't know if I can actually get this picture into the picture, but the Portland Crones, wise older women who aren't going to the top of the mountain anytime soon, are presenting their Crones concert for the Portland Storytellers Guild on Saturday, June 3rd at Artichoke Music in Portland. Now, you are all invited, of course, to come and see us in person, but we also, Artichoke Music live streams that on their YouTube channel, and you can look at it later sometime if you're interested by just going to YouTube and Artichoke Music and looking for the Portland Storytellers Guild.
But I just wanted to share that with you. The Crones were actually born at Fanning the Embers. That was a concert that a group that started forming with the conversation pre-pandemic at Fanning the Embers, and we're still going strong. So we'd love to see you there or share this with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. And see, Rebecca, what you spawned out of Fanning the Embers, a bunch of old crones. So we'd like to thank all of the tellers tonight. Let's see, we started off with Billy telling about mothers and some of the nice, what do you remember your mother telling us? And I remember a lot of nice things, but not much specific other than you really shouldn't eat that bad Chinese food at weddings. You know what happened. And so, and then we went on there for for Rebecca, telling a travel story about the Seattle World's Fair, among some other things. And then some other great stories from Pat about her traveling around truck stops, and as a woman in her 40s at a truck stop climbing into truck cabs. I don't know, that kind of raised some suspicions in my mind, but I'm glad she got back out of the truck okay. And so then we had some good story swaps. Thank you all for telling your stories, climbing the mountains and everything. And we'd like to also thank all of the folks who actually came and listened to these stories in person, about 15 in person, and about 15 online tonight. But we wouldn't be able to tell stories if we didn't have people to listen to them. So thank you all, and we'll see you on June 16th. And that's it. It's a wrap. Thank you.